Why do we play chess? Well, one of the main reasons is, of course, we want to win. But sometimes we can take part in a game which is of great interest, even if we lose. One such game is Sergei Karjakin's game against Boris Avrukh from the Biel tournament in July 2003. Of course, by this moment, Karjakin was already a grandmaster, a strong grandmaster with a rating of 2560. And here he plays against one of the main experts of the opening of d4, which is Boris Avrukh, the grandmaster from Israel. Here we will observe one of the most interesting games of this DVD, where Avrukh charges towards black's king with great effect. So the opening started with the Queen's Gambit accepted, like this. And we've seen this as one of the strings to his armoury, to Karjakin's armoury, as black against d4. And they followed the main line where black allows white to just capture this pawn back on c4 in order to get free development like this. And c5 castles a6. So what is the point of a6? Well, black is attempting to gain space on the queen side with b5. Also, once that happens, the bishop can now come to b7 and control some central squares. So even if you've never seen this opening before, black is still following the classical ideas of opening rules, which is controlling these two centre squares here and basically developing. What black hasn't done, though, is develop this bishop on f8. The reason why is that black is attempting to wait for white to capture on c5, so the black bishop can come out and capture the pawn in one go. Of course, in some positions this can entail a degree of risk because black is not developing. And as we see in this game, the king on e8 can be caught a little bit short in the centre. So, bishop b3. This is actually for those who read these excellent books by Boris Avrukh himself on 1d4, which has been published in the past few years, and he recommends this move bishop b3. The point being that after black plays b5, it no longer hits the bishop on c4. So white can now strike at this queenside structure with a4 and b4. Now, Boris's line in his book is to play knight d2 first, followed by e4. And of course white wants to really push e4 because, like in any opening, you need to try and do a pawn break in order to open lines for your major pieces. So that is the general structure in that line there. Although Avrukh in this variation played a5. What is he trying to achieve? Well, I've got to say that before I saw this game in preparation for this DVD, I hadn't actually seen this variation before, but it's very, very interesting, as you're about to see. So black continued bishop b7, and here we see the idea of bishop a4 check. Well, you might think it's just a check. What is the point of playing a5 like this? We're going to see it now. e4. Quite an amazing move where the pawn moves on a square where two black pieces can, of course, capture this. But as we've said, black is very much behind in development. And the longer that black leaves that bishop on f8, the longer his king will have to remain in the centre there on e8. And because of this, already we have this pin towards the black king like this. There are some kind of tricks hanging in the air. Now, black can take on e4, and I'm not really going to focus too much on it. But the point is that, for example, if knight takes e4, knight e5 comes with terrible effect here. And already we have a lot of pressure on this knight. Black probably has to retreat like this with knight f6. How do we now remove the defence of the knight? Quite simple with bishop g5. And I think already white has a crushing position here. The threat mainly being, for example, bishop e7, take on f6, and take on d7. What did black do wrong there? Well, he hasn't castled. Very important though, and that's one of my main rules when I teach young players. You've got to get castled early. Of course, Sergei is an experienced grandmaster, so he's going to dice with it a little bit more. Let's see what he does. Well, he correctly decides I'm not going to capture that pawn. Let's get my pieces out. And this option allows black to try and play quite a risky variation, which is to castle queenside. But at least it gets the king out of danger in the centre. So white played bishop g5. This move was criticised by Avrukh himself, and he suggested that I should just play knight e5, leading to variations where white is still trying to attack that knight on d7. It's all very interesting, of course, this variation. So bishop g5, and now Sergei took the opportunity to capture on e4. This leads to immense complications, which I'm sure both players could never have seen all of it to the very end. But sometimes in chess, that's part of it. You're taking risks, and with risks, it comes risks for your opponent as well. So Avrukh had no choice but to continue with his plan of knight e5. Right, black is under huge pressure along these diagonals, isn't he? Look at that, look at those bishops. Bishop cutting the black king off, black cannot castle queenside. Of course, the other bishop pointing towards the black king via that diagonal. So, what is black going to do? Well, he can eliminate this bishop. Bishop takes d7 check, and king went to e7. How would you evaluate a position like this? Let's have a look at the material count. Well, white is a pawn down, but black has a very weak king here. Then again, black can argue, Karjakin could say, well, is my king that bad? Since there are no real open lines towards my king. I have eliminated this bishop on g5, and also, white is still playing with a number of his major pieces on the back rank. So they're not really in threatening positions, he could argue. And I think chess is sometimes a discussion between two players in how they perceive a position. Karjakin is clearly taking big risks here, but I believe the tournament situation warranted that. Right, let's see what white should do here. f4, that's a good idea. Bringing in the rook on f1 and attacking the knight simultaneously. If you can develop a piece and gain time along the way, that's clearly going to be a good idea. So, knight e4. Apparently this was given as a mistake, but again, it's such a natural move to move the knight back into the centre. According to Avrukh, f6 was better, and black eliminates the knight on e5 like this. So Avrukh now suggests the very crazy line with the bishop takes e6 and queen g4 check. But this is extremely risky for both players. I mean, king e7, knight d2. Black is now a whole bishop ahead, but his king is extremely weak still. And I talked a moment ago about how you should bring your major pieces in and develop very quickly. Here we see the rook on e1. A1 is able to come to e1 very quickly now. So I think you'd probably have to favour white here. Going back to the game continuation, knight e4 and knight d2. Avrukh said he thought this took him a long time to understand this move, but even though he's exchanging a piece off, the knight was very bad on b1. In fact, it cuts off the coordination of white's pieces, doesn't it? So he decides, even though I'm going to exchange my knight off, I'm going to exchange it off for my opponent's good knight. And sometimes in chess, if you can exchange off your bad piece for your opponent's good piece, that is actually a good thing to gain. So, there was a swap, and rook d8. And now, if you think the game isn't interesting already, it kicks into big gear now, because f5. This is clearly the correct way to go about things. If your opponent's king is in the centre, and you've castled and they have not, you should really go after them. Especially if you have a lead in development, you really need to attack very quickly. Moves such as king h1, or maybe something like h3, they're not that good in this position, because they don't really understand what white is trying to achieve, which is taking advantage of this lead in development like this. So, f5. And now the game got very complicated. Rook takes d7, f takes e6. Again, we could have just captured the rook, but this position is not about material, it's about attacking, it's about initiative, which we've talked about in previous games here. And now queen takes e5. Wow, what a move. The idea is to take advantage of this idea here, the pin down the d file. But again, this was given as a mistake. Well, I'll just quickly, apparently, I mean, these are all computer moves, but rook takes d4, rook takes f7 check. Most of us would think, well, black should surely resign here. But amazingly, after king takes e6, the position is somehow holdable for him. An unbelievable position, I would say, here. And immensely complicated for the players to try and navigate through in a normal game. So rook takes f7 check, and rook takes d7. So what has gone on here? Well, we've had a whole barrage of tactics, and now we see that white has a rook, but black has two bishops. Of course, two bishops tend to be very strong compared to one rook. However, we have to take into account this poor position of the black king, the fact that the queen's being attacked, the fact that white can now play rook e1 with a pin, which would pretty much decide the game here. Very complicated position. And it's no surprise that Karjakin blundered with the obvious looking queen e4, because rook d8, and that's a very strong move. You might be asking why not rook e1, winning the queen, but this falls for black's trap, which is to sacrifice the queen, like this. And here we see black has 2 bishops and a rook for the queen. Normally that's good. Of course, white has the lead in development, but white has run out of actual pieces to help the queen in order to try and checkmate black. So probably we have to say that black is doing okay here. But after rook d8, this is a very nice move from Avrukh. And after king moved, rook e1. Of course, there are many other moves. Queen h4. And I think here now we can see the problem for black here. The king has been floating around like this. And the problem is lack of development, and it's really come to the fore now, hasn't it? Black's apparent sort of, taking pieces, neglecting castling has come to haunt him here. And it's no surprise the game was over in just a few moves. Queen e6, again, many roads lead to Rome, but here we see the idea of rook e5 is going to be coming with devastating effect. g6, g3, and the game was actually over here. Rook e5, and black had to give up the queen, which ended up him losing like this. Very nice by Avrukh. So what can we learn from that game? Well, even if you're an experienced player, or you're playing someone you think who's much lower rated than you and so on, don't forget the golden rule. Get yourself castled. Once you castle, you can do all the attacking moves that you like, but generally that's the main rule that you should bring into the fore in any game that you play.